Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, episode 231, Widows Unfiltered, an interview with Dr. Lucy Kalanithi.
Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, the only podcast that offers a proven process to help you work through your grief, to grow, evolve, and create a future you can truly look forward to. Here's your host, Master Certified Life Coach, Grief Expert, Widow, and Mom, Krista St-Germain.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I got a good one for you today. I just finished my conversation with today's guest, and it was phenomenal. Before I tell you a little bit about her, I do want to remind you that starting next Monday, you are invited to participate in this year's Happier Holidays for Widowed Moms online event. It is 3 days. I want to help you have holidays that suck a little less. We might not make them fully happy, but at least we can make them happier, which is why it's called the Happier Holidays for Widowed Moms event. You can go to coachingwithkrista.com/free holiday event to sign up. If you want to do the fully free version, you can. If you are the person who wants the VIP version, you can take advantage of that too, which includes a whole lot of resources that I put together for you, and also a bonus 90-minute session where I will be going even deeper into the tools that we're teaching, and then coaching as well. There's tapping recordings that I have done to make the holidays easier, and just a nice little bundle of things that I think will make your holidays suck a whole lot less. And you can get that again, coachingwithkrista.com/free holiday event. We'll also have a pop-up Facebook group that we'll be using just for this event so we can connect and share ways to make our holidays a little easier. All right. So you are invited to that. We start Monday, November 6th. So go get registered and I'll see you there. Okay. So let me tell you about Dr. Lucy Kalanithi. I have a very long bio in front of me. I say that because I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to hit the highlights. So Dr. Lucy is a clinical associate professor of medicine at Stanford University. She's an advocate for culture change around healthcare value, especially as it relates to palliative care. And she's the widow of Dr. Paul Kalanithi, who authored the #1 New York Times bestseller, When Breath Becomes Air. His book was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. It was translated into more than 40 languages, and she wrote the epilogue of this book. And when I say epilogue, I don't mean a couple of paragraphs. I mean something you should go and read as a widow immediately. So relatable, so human, had me in a puddle. I was actually walking as I was listening to the epilogue, but so moving. I highly recommend that you go and listen to it. Dr. Lucy also graduated from the Yale School of Medicine. She did her postdoctoral fellowship at Stanford's Clinical Excellence Research Center. She has a TED Med talk called What Makes Life Worth Living in the Face of Death. It's been viewed more than 2 million times. And more than anything, she's just a widowed mom who gets it, who I think you're really going to relate to and enjoy hearing from. And sometimes, honestly, y'all, when I do interviews like this, I have to pinch myself. Like, these are the kinds of amazing conversations I get to have with people that change the way we think about grief. And I'm just so grateful for that. So I can't wait for you to listen and learn from Dr. Lucy. And with that, I will stop talking so you can hear her. All right, enjoy. All right. Dr. Lucy, welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast. I'm glad you're
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Tell my listeners a little bit about who you are, what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a widowed mom, obviously. I'm a doctor. I have a 9-year-old fourth grade daughter who is a total goof. She has a pet snail and still has wiggly teeth, and we're doing well these days for the most part. My husband, Paul, died of lung cancer in 2015. He was also a physician. We met in medical school. And then he was a writer as well. And he published a memoir about his illness and about being a doctor and a patient, both. It was called When Breath Becomes Air. And then after he died, the following year, I did a book tour on his behalf. So that was like one of the things that happened to me after he died. It actually turned out to be really connecting and great. Although initially I only did it because the publisher told me. So maybe we can talk about that too. But
yeah,
that's me.
Yeah, I have so many questions for you. I specifically, so my husband died in 2016. And so as I was, familiarizing myself with, first of all, Paul's book, because I had heard about it so many times, but I'd never read it. Just struck by the epilogue. I literally cannot imagine having to write. I mean, you didn't have to, but writing something so intense. I'm so curious. What was that like? When did you write it? How did you do that? It had me literally like weeping in a puddle. I'm just like tearing up just thinking about it. Like, how did you do that?
Yeah. So, right. I wrote the epilogue to Paul's book, that is kind of describes the day that he died and, reflects on him and then reflects on a little bit of what was happening right after, including like his grave. And, how did I do it? So you're right. I kind of did have to, but that part actually felt really good. So I'm not a writer at all. I'm more of a talker. I don't really like writing. And but because he had written this memoir and it was being published after he died, the publisher, which was Random House, said, "Would you be willing to write an epilogue?" And at first that sounded really crazy. And then I realized that if Paul like could have written about the day he died, like that like was part of the story that he was telling, was like how to face when you know you're dying. And so I thought like the reason that I wanted to do it and the reason that I felt compelled to do it is because it was like in service of Paul or like in continued partnership with Paul. And I mean, like we had known obviously that Paul was going to die. We knew for about 2 years. But even when it happened, like I was so surprised by how totally shocked I was in a way, right? Like it was like he was here and then he disappeared. It was like I just was like, he disappeared. He disappeared. He's not here. He disappeared. And somehow that just was like so disorienting, even being a doctor, even knowing he was sick. Like that was so surprising, like existentially, right?
Yeah.
And so then, and I feel like I'm sure people can relate to this, but like after you've been like so partnered for so long and then the person disappears, like for me, having this project that was his and that was like, I'd been obviously supporting him as a writer and like helping with the medication, like everything. Right. So, just like having that continued project weirdly was great and compelling. And sort of like the only time that I felt like myself was when I was working on that. And then, and ultimately, I actually asked for a ghostwriter. And so I got linked up with this woman named Emily Rapp Black, who wrote a memoir called Still Point of the Turning World about her son having Tay-Sachs and dying. And she is just like hilarious and profane and like swears all the time and like became a very close friend quickly and is an amazing writer and sort of like coached me to pull out the pieces that like she could then help me weave into like a coherent story. But when I look back, I actually wrote like most of it myself and then she kind of shaped it, which I think is like one of the hard parts about being a writer. But it turned out to just feel like I say, like the only time I felt like myself. And then she gave me all this writing advice too. Like she said, like, okay, if you're going to describe the day that Paul died, like what did the light look like coming into the room when it was like such and such time? And like, what kind of chairs were you sitting in the room? And she said, like, the more visceral sensory detail that you can give, like the more specific, the more universal it will end up feeling to the reader, because then they'll feel like they're there and then they can like try on their own feelings or like bring in their own memories. And so that was interesting advice too, but it weirdly turned out to be okay and helpful.
I definitely felt like I was there. And I also think, by the way, if somebody is listening to this, when I heard epilogue, I was thinking a couple of pages, right? Not what I don't know how many it was, but not this. No No offense to Paul at all in his book. Amazing. But the epilogue did it, right, for me. And maybe that's because, I'm a widow, but oh my gosh. I still just can't. Yeah, it was just absolutely stunning. How soon after he died did you write that?
He died in March and we were writing it in like the summer. Wow. So like a few months later. And then the book came out the subsequent January.
Amazing. What was your grief fog like? Did that affect you much?
Yeah. I love how you're not like, did you have grief fog? You're just like, what was your grief fog like? Good question. Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because I felt so in it with my like grief / thinking about Paul / my daughter. And then like my mom, I'll like tell my mom something about that period of time, like in retrospect, and she'll be like, I was there for that, and I'll be like, you were like, it's just like, what? And and then I feel like for a while you like forget how to chew and people are just like, trying to make you eat. And, I remember like initially just feeling so lonely all the time. Like friends would come over and I would just be like, they could be here or not be here. I mean, I'm sure it was better that they were there, but I just felt so lonely. And my mom, like, she was like, I promise you won't feel this lonely forever. I promise things will fill in. And I was like, I kind of don't believe it at first. And then it did happen. And now I feel like so connected and like part of a like nest of people. It's my daughter and me and 2 cats in our house, but I feel like, I feel ensconced now. And then, yeah, in terms of like fog, I also had a lot of physical symptoms. I don't know if you had this, but like my hands like were like burning and tingling all the time, both hands. And I would wake up at night and feel it. And then I had all this catastrophic thinking about it. I was like, this is a nerve disease. And then I'm not going to be able to take care of Katie. And like, this is going to like ruin my career and we're not going to be okay. And then like a year later, it just kind of like lifted. It might've been less than a year, but like it took a while. And then as a doctor, like looking back, I was like, oh, right. That was like somatic symptom disorder. That was like a functional, it's like a physical manifestation of stress, the same way people get like headaches, insomnia, belly pain. But I don't think I had quite like tried on for size how you could get like nervy type symptoms, like this tingling. And meanwhile, I like thought I was coping okay. I was like, I'm doing okay. I'm so proud of myself. Why are my hands falling off? So I just feel like, it's like I do think the only way through is through. Like you kind of, it's almost like there's like a certain amount of feelings you just like have to feel, and your body can do it for you. You can do it by listening to music. You can write, you can talk, you can go to therapy, but it's like, I just feel like the only way through is through, and it's really hard. And you just sometimes, and you partly just waiting it out.
Yeah. I love to, that you're normalizing the whole fear of, the you dying, right? As a parent, I see that really, really often. And people, also then shortly question their sanity, but it's so common, right? Like, of course, why wouldn't we have that fear when you just lost the other parent and you love this child or your children so much?
Totally.
Yeah. What did you, I have friends who are doctors and they tell me that they didn't really learn much about grief, or that, what they learned in medical school about grief really wasn't all that useful to them. Can you talk about that for you? What did you think grief was going to look like? What had you learned? How did that actually compare?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, we weren't really taught about grief in medical school per se. We weren't actually taught, like, I feel like the weird thing about grief is just like grief and illness, right? Is like your identity is changing like through the whole thing. So like you're really sad and you're missing something, but also like you are a different person living in a different world. And I think that's also true to people who get a diagnosis or who, have something about their body that's changing, or even with aging or whatever. And so I think I didn't realize like how that upheaval in identity is like a big part of what is hard to then reconstruct and come to terms with. And it's like we just didn't learn a lot about the like experiential aspects of illness, or certainly grieving or caregiving. all of that stuff is like a bit hidden when you're in medical school and you're learning science.
Mm.
And so that may be changing, but slowly. I see you like crossing your fingers,
Yeah.
agree. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I learned a lot. And I learned to ask like deeper questions or to like sit for a while, to wait for an answer or sit for a while when there is no answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I don't know if you've seen, like, I don't know enough about this to truly comment, but like psychiatrists are interested in grief, and like there's research on like specific medications indicated for grief. And like that's so interesting because it's kind of like, oh wow, this is like a really like natural human thing that like
Mm-hmm.
everyone does. And it's like sort of, it's not fixable.
Mm-hmm.
It's like something, I don't really think you can fix it with a medication. And so,
Well,
but
and
at the
fixing
same time,
implies
like
that something's broken.
totally, yeah. And you're like, no, this is like what human beings do and have to do, right? If you're lucky in a way, right? Because it means you like loved really deeply. But at the same time, you know, there is like depression and there is anxiety and there is panic attacks and there is like stuff that can get triggered. And so sometimes it is all sort of swirled together. But I don't think it should be medicalized, but I do think it should be taught and seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have really mixed thoughts about it too, because I can see, just thinking about like the prolonged grief disorder diagnosis that's out now, I can see the benefit of helping someone whose quality of life is just really in the toilet realize that it doesn't have to stay there.
Yeah.
But also, can we use it for good and not, have people turning it against themselves as though they're doing something wrong, or making it such that we start to believe that grief is a problem that we need to solve? Can we avoid perpetuating the myth that it ends? Like, it's all complicated.
Yes,
but
totally.
I do like that conversation is happening.
Yeah, totally. Yes, agree. Yeah. And I think maybe it just has to do with like the instinct of the actual grieving person, right? Like, yeah, like how they feel like they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? If they're in distress to a degree that they feel like they need more help. Kind of the same way as like depression. It's like there's medication for depression, there's therapy, and lots of other things. And if you like put them together, they all work together.
Mm-hmm.
So, but grief is also just like takes work, even if the work is just like persisting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which can be in and of itself exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't think I fully realized the physical impact of grief. I don't think I never had, tingling hands. That wasn't something I had, but I didn't expect it to be so physically draining.
Physical. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about, just thinking about how it's changed over time for you? Did you come into the experience anticipating that grief would end in a way? There was like, that it was time bound in any way? What was that like? How is it?
I didn't have that. I mean, because I also think like love doesn't end. So no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How did it change over time?
I feel like for me, I feel like the pain and like sadness and like big waves are less, certainly now, a lot. And I feel like the love is exactly the same. Like that's how I feel. Yeah, I feel like I'm like back in the world, like in a really full way. And like, I really love Paul. Like I fell in love once since Paul died and out of love. And yet I've just like, Paul's my family forever. He's Katie's dad forever. And those are the grandparents forever. And, yeah. And then like sometimes are still obviously hard, like, just like parenting logistics period, but also like every wedding anniversary, I like think I'm going to be fine. And then I like rage bake a carrot cake, like immediately upon waking up in the morning. So rage like, baking. You know what I mean? Rage baking. So yeah, I mean, yeah, but certainly it's like less.
What have the conversations been like with your daughter as she ages? How have you worked to maintain Paul's memory and keep it active in her life?
Yeah. So, I mean, in a number of different ways, it's very important to me that like she have the chance to know Paul and like understand where she came from while also like, like not pressuring her to incorporate him in a certain way. She was 8 months old when he died. She's 9 now. She knows all about him. We have like pictures of him in our house. And then like his brother, one of his brothers, like has her for a sleepover once a week because of like where her school is. And they both live here. And then the grandparents just retired here. So like he's like in the mix, including because like his extended family is like with us on a day-to-day basis still. And then she knows like I'll like say random things about him. I'll be like, wow, you like taking such a long hot shower. That's just like daddy. I don't like an hour power shower, but you do and daddy did. So like she knows stuff like that. And then I made her like one of the things I did purposefully was for her 3rd birthday, I made her this like book using one of those like photo book services. That was like literally a story about Paul. It was like once upon a time, there was a little boy, like he lived in Arizona. He had 2 brothers. He liked animals and he tried hard, and then it was like, and then he like grows up and he wants to be a doctor. And then it's like, he decided he wanted to have a baby and like, guess who the baby was? And then she's in the book. And then it says like, he got sick and his body stopped working. And like, here's some ways we remember him. And here's like all the people in our family and life. And then it's just sort of like, just for her to like see the pictures and like get like, almost like get to know him as a character, like as she was getting to know like, Doc McStuck, like everybody else, like he was like a character. And then, the interesting thing is like he wrote this memoir, so then she'll read that at a certain point. Like I think like an older high school kid could read it. And but one time she was like, I'm mad that Eve, her cousin, remembers daddy and I don't. And so like I wonder whether she'll be like, I'm mad that other people are reading this book. Like you just never know, right? Like and at the same time, like the fact that our family shape, which is me and her, like nuclear family, is different from the kids at school, and the fact that she wants a baby sister but doesn't have a baby sister, she's like, can I have a baby sister, is like in a way like just as like salient to her. It's sort of like,
but that's a loss for her.
I want a baby sister too. So like it's like just coming to terms with like the way your family is in a bunch of ways. It's like part of her experience. And then like we have really great neighbors and stuff. And it's like, I feel like, I mean, it's like hard to be a solo parent, obviously. And I feel like the like nuclear family, as we think of it, like 2 parents, is like too small for anyone anyway. Like I think like you can't raise kids in one house, and it takes like a village, and like a lot of people and influences and relationships and support.
I know that's one of the things you're passionate about. Like what would you like to see if you could just wave the magic wand about, how we define families, how we do families?
Ooh, I haven't like exactly thought about that. I mean, I feel like we have this idea of like, there's 2 parents and 2 kids, but like most, or like, I don't know if it's most, but like a huge proportion of households have a solo parent, whether it's like the parents are separated from each other or one is not there for some reason. And then that's also like, there's so many other versions of family, right? And it's like, it doesn't have to be like one mom, one dad. And oftentimes there's like another adult who's taking care of the kid. And well, I'll mention this. I made a podcast during the pandemic called Gravity, and it's about like thinking about things differently, in particular, like around hardship. And one of the episodes is about family. And I wish we had included like even more of what the person said. We interviewed Andrew Solomon, who is a gay man and writer who wrote a book called Far from the Tree about raising kids who are different from you. And at the end of this like long researchy process to write the book, he and his husband decided to have a child. They hadn't even like known whether they would. And it's sort of like talking to all these parents of diverse children. Like he learned so much and then wanted to be a parent at the end. And he even like when we were having this discussion, like some of it didn't make it into the show, but like he even talked about like what's the word? He actually talked about this like group that was polygamist in Brooklyn. And then he talked about like all different kinds of family structures or like LGBT folks and like making a chosen family. And it just was really inspiring. And then I think the other thing for family is just like there's so little structural support, like for childcare, like universal childcare, and just thinking about like caregiving for parents, like caregiving for anybody, but like caregiving as like national infrastructure that is like real work and unsupported. And like there's a huge gender issue there. And just like, wow, we could have a lot more support for parents and caregivers.
Yeah. I think a lot of my listeners are nodding heads.
Yeah. And like, we're like sandwich generation, and there's parents, and there's just like, it's a lot.
Yeah. I feel like it's a lot for me. And yet I am in comparison, it's not a lot at all. Right. Like, so you can only imagine when you think about, how much more intense it could be. And given all the privilege that I have and all the support that I have.
Totally. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So when you think about like the early days of grief, and let's just be super general, like first couple of years, if you could go back and tell yourself something, give yourself some advice, what do you think you might tell yourself?
I mean, I think I would probably tell myself that like what my mom was saying was true. Like, you won't be lonely like this forever. Your life will be meaningful again. Like, just keep going and it will happen. And then I think like the very practical advice is like, do try to do like the basics of taking care of yourself and your body. Like, try to be sleeping regularly, try to eat regularly, try to exercise or go outside in the sun, like schedule regular get-togethers with a friend so you have something to look forward to. Like consider getting a therapist, all of those things, or support group, etc. But like it definitely will get better, and you'll feel like a person again.
How much do you think you would have believed yourself if you had?
I mean, if it was me, I would have believed it. If it was me from the future, I would have believed it, but I wouldn't have believed that.
Like that woman knows what she's talking about.
I would have been like, clearly. Totally trust me. I would not do me wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, not like, it's hard. It's hard. Yeah.
It is hard. Yeah, it is hard. It is hard to imagine. I think too, I wish I would have known, only things that honestly I've learned recently about what was going on in the brain in grief. Like it would have helped me feel less crazy.
Like what?
Like I didn't really understand why you know something intellectually, but don't believe it emotionally. Like when the garage door opens and I know intellectually it's not him.
Oh,
right. There's a part of me that goes, oh, like he's back, he's home. And I didn't
like
really
1 second.
Yeah. I didn't really understand that it takes time for the brain to relearn so that it can make accurate predictions. Right. And like I also would have wished somebody would have told me that, hey, you're going to yearn. And that's partly that is your brain's way of trying to find this person who it has encoded as super important to you. And that doesn't have to make rational sense. Yeah. Like it's okay. Because I'm a very logical person.
Yeah.
And so
that's really interesting.
It's really nice to understand. Hey, none of this needs to make sense to you for you to have faith that you aren't a crazy person.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that Paul told you before he died that he like wanted you to go have another relationship if you wanted one. What's that been like for you to like date? I know you said you've fallen in love and out of love once since he died. Can you talk about that?
The person I fell in love with actually was a widower also, which was really helpful. Because it's like we both understood like you can love two people in this situation. And Yeah. And then I like right before the pandemic was thinking like, oh, I should make an online profile. I've never done that before. And then it was the pandemic. So that like busted up 2 years of that. And
Yeah.
then now I'm just starting to think about it again. And it's hard because like I've never made an online profile and but it's like that is the deal now, you know? And my sister, I'm like, I don't know if I went to it. My sister's like, you definitely went to, you should. It's kind of like, she's like, you just can't see it now because you don't know the specifics. But she's like, it's kind of like if you were like, oh, I don't feel like planning a vacation. That's like too much work to plan a vacation. But then you end up in like Tokyo or you end up in like, you know, Brazil. And you're like, oh, of course I want to be here. Yeah, this is the best. And so she's like, you just have to like bite the bullet and plan a vacation and then you will be happy later. That was kind of good advice. Because I almost feel like I'm like happy enough that I mean, I'd like to have sex with someone, but I feel like really happy enough. And then I feel like I have a lot of intimacy in my life, just like through other relationships and like, you know, but I don't want to look back on this time and be like, wait, why was I not dating? Like that was my like 40s. So I don't know. I'm like on the precipice, I think, of like thinking about it again.
I think I must have been like a couple weeks ahead of you in that because I decided to do an online profile right before COVID and then met someone right before COVID. And then we just bubbled down.
It's cool.
Yeah. Because I honestly hadn't had any interest in dating until then. I was like, you know, maybe I like,
so
I got
it was like 3 years basically. 3 years
about
later.
3.5. Yeah. Where I felt like I'm good on my own. Like I don't need anything, but maybe it would be fun. Maybe.
Yeah.
You know, so let's give it a shot. Yeah. And then. Boom.
And then what? What's happening now?
We bought a house together.
Yay.
2021. And yay. I mean, it's a very different relationship than Hugo and mine. But yeah. Combined families, the whole deal.
Oh, that's
He's
so
not
nice.
a widower. He doesn't have any experience. He did lose his sister to suicide when he was younger, and so he has had a significant loss. But no loss of a partner. He's divorced. So, but
great story.
But Hugo and I also never talked about it.
Oh yeah. How did you feel? Were you like, oh?
I never thought he wouldn't want me to.
Well, yeah, because he died suddenly, so it's like you didn't. You wouldn't have really talked about it. Yeah.
No, but he was kind of like a heart forward, live for the moment, like do what makes you happy kind of guy. So I never really wondered if he would, you know, and honestly, kind of our lives too. Also,
yeah, totally. Yeah.
We're not here anymore. So we got to live for us, but
I totally agree.
Yeah. So when you started dating the other person, was that like a conscious, I'm ready to date decision, or was it just kind of happened?
It just kind of happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was like 2 years.
Necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of, we need to be in a romantic relationship to be happy. So always my biggest concern is like, can we find a place where we actually do feel good about life? And then if we want to go forward again and we want to experience that, great, but definitely not a requirement for satisfaction with life.
Yeah. It's also so interesting. Like all the old ladies I know, like have a boyfriend, like all these old ladies who are like our neighbors or like my friends' parents are like, I'm going to go out with my boyfriend. And I'm like, that's so funny. You're like 79 and you have a boyfriend. But there's also like a lot of structures for having a serious relationship, right? Like it's like, you wouldn't even necessarily have to live together. Or like, I'm kind of like, I never want to pick up someone's socks for the rest of my life. Like I'm quite sure about that. So like, how does that manifest? You know, it's like, but so I don't know. I'm curious about like, do you combine households? Do you not? Do you like, what happens if you're older? What happens if you're like, whatever, just, I don't know. I can see lots of different ways of having a relationship also.
Yeah. And no wrong way. I know for me, it's definitely changed. Like so Hugo was my second husband and it felt really important to me to be married to him. And partly I think that has to do with the age of my kids at the time and some of my thoughts about setting an example and some stuff that I feel like I'm in a different place about now. But now it doesn't feel important to me at all. And it's interesting to me because when we got married, when Hugo and I got married, it really wasn't that important to him. And I think part of that's French Canadian. Like in Canada, you don't really get remarried. Like everybody's in a partnered relationship if you get divorced, but
like
it's not like
necessarily
a thing,
married.
right? Like, and his mom and his, I would say stepdad, but again, not married, have been together for, 30 years and it's just not a thing. So like he got married to me because I really wanted to. And it's fascinating to me to see how important that used to be and how now I'm like, don't need it.
Fascinating. Yeah. Good example. Yeah, totally.
Don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have a million other questions. I should revisit the list. Oh, I know. I wanted to hear more about suffering versus pain. And I know that might not be the languaging that you use, but I know in your book you talk, or in your TED Talk, TED Med Talk, do I have that right? TED Med.
Yeah.
You talk about, we really can't live a life that doesn't have suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And so to paraphrase, right, you say this in your words, please. Like basically we want to figure out how to live a life that includes suffering. So I want to hear more about that. And then also I want to know, do you distinguish pain versus suffering? Are they different to you? Tell me what you think.
Yeah, they're totally different to me. I do use those words.
Yeah.
So this is sort of like a Buddhist idea, I think, but this actually, I went through an episode of depression well before Paul was sick when I was a medical resident and started seeing a therapist who was very helpful. And one of the things that she did for me was so helpful was like thinking about reconceiving about this. And I remember this one day she had a whiteboard in her office and she wrote on the whiteboard, pain plus non-acceptance of pain equals suffering. Because I do think there's like pain for sure in all these different ways in our lives. And then like pushing back against it or not accepting it is like another layer that increases the like pain or painful experience, I think. And so like over the years, I've thought a lot about like, okay, suffering is not some like side thing that happens that we're trying to just like avoid. It's just like it will happen to people in all kinds of ways. And for people listening to this show, it's like happened potentially in bigger ways than it has to a lot of other contemporaries. But it's a thing. And like all around the world and all across human history, there is lots of hardship. And then I think like the interesting other part about thinking about that is like, when should you accept it and when should you not accept it? So like, if it's something that you really can't change, it can be so helpful to work on acceptance so that you can like soften up to what's happening and like not push against it in a way that's going to hurt you more. That's like hard, right? But like meditation helps and like different kinds of therapy help. And I think that's like a very, it's like a healthy thing to try to do. And then there's other types of suffering in the world, like primarily about injustice, right? Where it's like, you wouldn't accept it. You would instead like push back against it in all kinds of different ways, like protesting or changing policy or whatever. And so I think like there's an interesting thing to try to think about, like what do you accept and what do you not? And there's actually this beautiful article that I'll mention. I think it's in The Nation, and it's an article by Adi Barkan. His name is spelled A-D-Y and his last name's Barkan, B-A-R-K-A-N. And he has ALS and was like a young lawyer and activist who was diagnosed with ALS like in his early 30s. And he wrote this beautiful article about the Serenity Prayer and like deconstructing the Serenity Prayer and reordering the Serenity Prayer and like trying to think like, for me as an activist who now has ALS, like activism is like defined by resistance. But then I think that in order to like be okay with what's happening in my life, I have to learn how to accept. And in dealing with this really serious illness. And so that's like a great piece to read and reflect on acceptance. Okay. It's really beautiful.
Thank you for that. We'll try to find it and link it in the show notes. Yeah. So how do you put that into practice on a daily basis, right? How do you notice when you're suffering? How do you pivot? What do you do? Like, what's that like for you?
Yeah. I think I try, like, that's a good question. I mean, now that I feel like this is orientation is like important to me and helpful to me, I think I like I think I try to notice like when to apply it. Like, there were some things happening with my daughter at school where we had to like make a pivot and we ended up going to a different school.
Mm.
And I spent like so much time in the weeds thinking about it and like just trying to like just trying to figure out like how to handle it. But also and like help her. And it's worked out so fantastically. But it's just like really thinking about it and like stressed out about it. And my best friend, I mentioned this book by Andrew Solomon called Far from the Tree that I read before I got pregnant. Also while thinking about having a child. And my friend was like, hey, you know that book you love, Far from the Tree? It's about like a lot of families who are raising a kid who surprises them in some way or is different from them in some way.
Mm-hmm.
It's like all these different identities, everything from like deafness to autism to even a child who like commits a crime. Just like how do you understand a child and what does love mean as a parent? And she was like, instead of trying to solve this whole thing like a riddle for yourself, like maybe you should just go read that book again. Like maybe that's actually like what's gonna like help you feel grounded. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. It's like stepping back to like a bigger picture of like, what does it mean to be a parent? And like, how do I fit into like this tapestry of parents, like across space and
Mm-hmm.
time? And like, so, and like, how do I like understand that like my stress or like my suffering as a parent is not unique, in a way that's actually like very helpful to like be like, oh yeah, like we're not the only family who's like had to answer questions. Like we're not
Mm-hmm.
the only family who's like, you know, not had a
Mm-hmm.
straight path. And so, I think just like that kind of thing has been helpful.
Mm-hmm. What was it like to reread that book? Where do you
It's
remember
like
where you were?
I'm looking at it on my table right now and I
Okay.
haven't cracked it yet. But she was
Uh-huh.
like, just read the intro alone. But it's like I even just like seeing it on my table so far, I'm like, okay, it just feels grounding. But I need to actually read it.
So interesting that you can feel grounded just looking at a book,
You know, isn't that
having
weird?
not even opened it yet again. Yeah, it'll be
Right?
interesting to see. I think for me, and anytime I reread a book, I'm always in a different place in my life. And so it's so fascinating how I pull something out that maybe I didn't notice before, or it means something so
Yeah,
different to me than maybe
yeah,
it meant in that
yeah.
prior place.
Or I'm sure, like I read it, like trying to decide whether to get pregnant, and then now I have a 9-year-old, and that's
Yeah.
just like such a rich, beautiful experience, and she's like amazing. And so to like read that and think about her and think about like how do you raise this person and like come to know this like beautiful person as a
Mm-hmm.
parent, you know, and what's your
Mm-hmm.
role?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old, and I can tell you that has evolved quite a bit as
Mm-hmm,
they age,
mm-hmm,
right? And they're still relatively young, all things considered. But yeah,
right. Yeah.
reassessing my role.
Yeah.
Something kind of unrelated, but I was really curious when I read the book. There's a passage that something like the easiest death wasn't necessarily the best, that the two of
Mm-hmm.
you had agreed on that. I really wanted to know more about what you meant by that. You know, what are your thoughts on the best death? What does that mean to
Mm.
you?
Yeah. I think in that part, Paul's writing about like, how do you decide? I can't remember the details, so I don't know if I can reference that, but that's basically like he's talking about being a doctor and helping people decide like,
Mm-hmm.
do they want to use like life support or not? And like all those kind of thorny questions about like quality and quantity of life. I mean, it's so funny. It's like people talk about like the good death, and it's like, I don't think there's like such thing as a good death. Because it's just like, it is hard. It is like
Mm-hmm.
sad. I'll never again read like, he died peacefully, surrounded by his family. I'm just like, oh my gosh, that is like
Mm-hmm.
such an intense process day. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, that is so, it's so intense. And then I'll just say this like about the like, you know, I remember like when Paul, again, like we knew Paul was dying of cancer and we were two doctors and we'd like been present at a lot of people when they were dying. And I remember being like pretty preoccupied about like, okay, like what if I need to like represent you and how am I gonna like, you know, help you choose what's best for you or help you
Mm-hmm.
like be the one choosing and like how would I know whether, you know, what technology to use and not, and stuff like that. What if you suffer unnecessarily? Like, I was just like, I don't want you to suffer unnecessarily.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him saying, like, you know what? The last day of your life, this was so sweet. He said, the last day of your life is not the sum of your life. The sum of your life is the sum of your life. And so he's like, whatever happens, like, you will have done your best. And like, that's last day of your life is just one day. And I was like, oh my God, it was so helpful and so lovely. And I feel like, you know, everyone just does their best, and there's always uncertainty, and there's always something you could regret. And you always like, will maybe wish you did something differently, or wonder if you did right by the person or whatever. And I just think that's like so common, and all you can do is just do your best, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we don't have the benefit of hindsight, and
Totally.
as we're
Totally. And even for us as two doctors, I was like, is this really it? Like, how do we know? Is this it? Like, I don't know. I can't tell. Like, you know, and that's like two doctors in a pretty like relatively predictable situation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Magic wand question again. If you could wave your magic wand as it pertains to end of life care, what kinds of changes would you make?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the like main thing is I would love people to know about palliative care and have access to palliative care. And like, just there's hospice, which is like a little subset of palliative care. That's for people who have a likely prognosis of 6 months or less. And then there's palliative care, which like you could be going through a curable illness, like, you know, lymphoma needing a bunch of chemo, or you could have a long-term illness like Parkinson's or heart failure, or, you know, a kind of advanced cancer and stuff like that. And palliative care, I think if we rebuilt healthcare, like exploded it and then rebuilt it, like palliative care would be what all of it was, because they're basically specialists in thinking about like, how do you make healthcare decisions that fit your life? How do you maximize your quality of life? And then when you're facing hard decision about healthcare, like, how do you think through that decision and like make the decision that best fits your values, in the face of uncertainty or in the face of like confusing options? And they are just amazing. Like, they're a team with usually like a provider, like a doctor, nurse practitioner, and then often a chaplain, a social worker, nurses, and they're just experts in like shaping your quality of life. And they can, like I say, they can help people at any stage of illness. And they also, interestingly, think of the family as their patient too. So like, oftentimes the family could have like a separate check-in with them about coping, or they just are amazing. So I feel like if you at all feel like that sounds helpful, you know, for some other future situation, they're just amazing. Yeah. And then, you know, there's some evidence that people who have an advance directive are more likely to die in the location that they would choose, and to have like satisfaction with their care, and to have their family feel like have less anxiety or depression after they die. But, you know, that also, it just, those are some of the things I think.
I love what you said about it being value driven.
Yeah.
Right. And you know, my assumption is that because everyone's values are so unique, that also means it's not about the care team in any way. It's about the values of the individual person and family.
Yeah.
Since, I don't know if this is an issue for you, but I just see it in a lot of widows that I work with, kind of comparing and despairing about how their person died relative, you know, to how other people's person died. Did your brain offer you very much of that? Wishing it had been different, or making it worse, or like any of that?
No, not really.
Yeah.
I was, at the time, there was the Facebook group Hot Young Widows Club. It's not there anymore, but it was like Nora McInerney's like homegrown thing. And it had like 1,000 people in it on Facebook. And that was very cool, because it was like, the person could be your spouse or not. They could die suddenly. They could die not. They could die by suicide. They could die by cancer. Like, and there was just this commonality, and everyone in like the grief experience between everyone And everyone was like really funny and really supportive. Like someone would post that they were lonely and then like 40 people would comment, or like people would be like, guys, I just took my husband's phone back to Verizon and then like just sobbed in the store and yelled at the guy. And like, how many people have done that? And then everyone's like, me too. And so, or people would ask a serious question or a dating question. Like it was wonderful. And so I think like I didn't do like comparing. I just felt like through this one support group, I felt like there, at least in that like culture and group, there like wasn't comparing. It was really good.
I love that you found that. And I love that we live in an age where technology supports that kind of connection.
Totally.
Because how many other women in your real life did you have
like,
that actually understood anything about your journey?
Like zero. Yeah.
So true.
Like more now, but like zero.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I always tell people too, like, because not every group out there on Facebook is like that one. Right. Sometimes.
Yeah. Some of them are like scrappier, just like don't fit with you. Yeah.
Yeah. But you got to keep looking until you find it, because they are out there.
True. Yep.
For sure.
Agree.
Yeah. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover or talk about that we missed? Things I could have asked you and didn't?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's this interesting thing, like after someone dies, I mean, I just wanted to mention it because like, I love Paul so much and all the things I said. And right when he got diagnosed, our marriage was going through a hard patch. He actually wrote about it. And I was so happy he wrote about it. It's at the beginning of the book. And I mean, partly I think as a reader, like you read that and you're like, oh, okay, this guy's like not going to sugarcoat and he's like not going to make his life look perfect. And I do feel like for a lot of people, there's like, you also had like a complicated marriage, or you also had like a regret about something. And it's like, I just feel like that's interesting because like our marriage ended up really solidifying after he got sick. I think like one of two things can happen when you take stock, right? But I don't know. I just wanted to mention it's just like nobody's situation is perfect, and you can have like complicated feelings after someone dies for like a whole lot of different reasons, and be loving them and be caring forward their legacy. And, and then for my daughter, it's like, I also like Paul needs to be a real person, not just like, reified, because that's like can happen after someone dies. And it's like, no, he was like a real, like messy, normal, like funny, goofy, like late for everything person.
Yes. Hugo's favorite word was the F word. And whenever he said it, his throat would flare up. And
oh, fabulous.
true friendship. No, I love that. I love what you said about the and, right? It really is about the and. And I'm really glad that you said that too, because that was one of the things that struck me about your story. First of all, that you persevered and went to a therapist specializing in people who are going through cancer and like did all that work. But yeah, it can go, I think you're right, one of two ways. And I notice sometimes too, in the work that I do, people will assume it's only for those that had happy, and I use that in quotes,
interesting
marriages, when in reality, all the time, it's no, that's not, I mean, yes, happy, but what does that even mean? Right? Totally. Happy is inclusive of a whole lot of ands. And sometimes those ands are affairs. And sometimes there's, really challenging situations and, a lot of real humanness that happens in marriages, which is not picturesque always.
Yeah. So it's nice to be able to connect with people about that. And I feel like that's something like widows can connect with each other on too, of just like, all the like and.
Yeah.
Totally.
And sometimes the stuff you find out after.
Yeah, I know. There's some like really intense, that's a whole other experience that I know some people are going through. That's a real challenge.
Yeah. It is like a multifaceted opportunity for challenges. We'll say that. Yeah. So where can people connect with you? They want to learn more about you.
I am on Twitter, although less recently, but still.
Are we still calling it Twitter?
X. I am.
I can't handle it.
I'm not going to call it X, honestly. So I'm at Rocket Girl MD, and then like I say, I have this podcast archive under Gravity. And yeah, those are the main ways to connect. Thanks for asking.
Okay. Yeah. We'll link to all of those in the show notes to make it easier for people.
Cool. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being willing to come.
It was so nice. I really appreciate it. And I think your work is so fantastic. I think you're such an example. And then the way you're leading other people is like so wonderful. And it's a club we don't want to be in, but I'll send people your way too. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Let's keep in touch.
Yeah, totally. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Okay. All right. Bye.
If you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and want to create a future you can truly get excited about even after the loss of your spouse, I invite you to join my Mom Goes On coaching program. It's small group coaching just for widowed moms like you, where I'll help you figure out what's holding you back and give you the tools and support you need so you can move forward with confidence. Please don't settle for a new normal that's less than what you deserve. Go to coachingwithkrista.com and click Work With Me for details and next steps. I can't wait to meet you.